let's take a look at an example comparison essay. This is a paper I got in a previous semester, and it earned an A in my class. It might not be perfect, but I never expect perfection. There are a lot of ways to earn an A on a paper in my class, and none of the requirements involve perfection. So let's go through and take a look at this paper. You'll notice that it's formatted to MLA standards. The formatting on this paper is perfect. As we scroll down, we'll see we have an intro paragraph, then we have body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2, body paragraph 3, and then we end on a conclusion for a total of 5 paragraphs. This is kind of that nice round safe number where you can introduce your material, make 3 points, which is enough to support basically any kind of argument, and then wrap things up with a conclusion. The introduction, if you read it over, and you can read this on your own, but you'll see that it pretty much just gives a little bit of backstory. The paper is about how George Washington and Taylor Swift are a lot more alike than most people would ever know. Now remember, in a college level course, when you write a paper, you want to come up with something interesting that nobody else has come up with. And I doubt there's anybody out there that has ever thought of George Washington and Taylor Swift as having a lot in common. And so that makes this an interesting paper topic, especially for a compare or contrast essay. And this happens to be a comparison essay, because there are a lot of surprising similarities between these two, as we'll see in a moment. So the introductory paragraph, the first paragraph of the essay, provides a little bit of backstory about who George Washington was, and a little bit of backstory about who Taylor Swift is. Now we know where the thesis statement is. It's in that sweet spot, the last sentence of the introductory paragraph. That's a safe place to put your thesis statement, especially in my class, because both the rubric and instructions say to do that. So let's take a look at this thesis statement, because it gives the main idea of the entire paper. And use your ear. Listen, you'll hear that this is a 3-prong thesis statement, which makes sense. A 5-paragraph essay will have 3 points for the body. All right, here we go. Taylor Swift and George Washington are similar in that they both have done things in their lives and careers that have had a great impact on the American economy during times of economic strife. They have both created legacies in their respective fields and created careers that can serve as examples for those who come after them. And they have both had messy breakups with the British. Did you hear those 3 points? So this pronged thesis lets us know exactly where this paper is headed. The entire paper will be about George Washington and Taylor Swift, her 2 subjects. The entire paper will focus on showing us surprising similarities. What similarities will she show us? Well, she's going to show us the economic impacts that they had. Then she'll move on and show us their lasting legacies. And she'll end on showing us how their breakups with the British were similar. So we can always trust the thesis statement to let us know where we want to look in a paper if we have specific interests we're looking at. So for example, if you are really interested in the American economy, from this thesis you know to focus on body paragraph 1. Let's take a look. Notice the topic sentence. It matches the first prong on the thesis. The first of the similarities between Taylor Swift and George Washington is their significant impacts on the U.S. economy during times of economic strife. You can hear that echoes the first thesis prong. Now, if you read this first body paragraph, you will see every sentence in this paragraph is based on the economic impacts these 2 very seemingly different characters had during times of strife. But as you read the paragraph, it'll unfold with specific examples and several points that show how George Washington and Taylor Swift have had similar impacts on the American economy. Now we trust our thesis statement, and we look, the middle body paragraph will be about their legacies and careers. So we scroll down, let's check our topic sentence. Another similarity between Swift and Washington is that they've both created long-lasting legacies in their respective fields. And again, if we read this paragraph, it will be all about how their legacies are somewhat similar. Now we go to the ender. She ends on this great point, and it's kind of a funny one. They're similar in that they both had messy breakups with the British. Now there's something happening here that you might not have noticed. She organized her 3 points using a very specific strategy. This last thesis prong has to sound kind of interesting to you, even if you don't care about George Washington or Taylor Swift. That messy breakup thing is kind of funny. So here's the strategy I'm going to tell you. After you've written your entire paper, and it doesn't matter what kind of paper it is, pretty much any paper, you're going to come up with 3 points, and after everything is done, you're going to have 1 point that you love, and you know it's a good one. It's going to make your argument. Always end on that point. You want to go out with a bang on your best point. So your last body paragraph will be your best argument. Your longest, your funniest, your most interesting, the one with the best examples. Now you'll have 1 point that you're not so sure about. It won't be a bad one, but it's the one that you're least confident in. The strategy for that? Hide it in the middle. That's the paragraph that gets rushed through most often. Experienced readers tend to skip the middle. They get a little tired. Experienced readers also know, go to the last body paragraph if you want to read the best point. Now, you'll have a point that you feel pretty good about, but you know it's not your best. That's the one you start with. It's strong enough to get readers interested, but you know it's not ending material. Ending material really has to be great. So you always want to end on your best, hide your weakest in the middle, and start with a decent point that's interesting enough to draw readers in. So for this video, we're now going to move down to that final body paragraph. We're going to trust her thesis that that final body paragraph will be about how George Washington and Taylor Swift are alike and that they both had messy breakups with the British. So let's take a look. The last similarity between Taylor Swift and George Washington is their subpar relationships with the British. So notice the topic sentence matches that final thesis prong. Let's now go through this paragraph. We're going to look to see that every single sentence kind of backs up what the topic sentence claims. We're also going to be on the lookout for transition words. Transition words are little words or phrases that remind us of the purpose of this paper. In this case, the purpose is comparison, to show how these two are surprisingly alike in ways that you might not have thought of. So we're looking for specific examples. We're looking to make sure everything in this paragraph is related to the topic sentence, and we're looking for transition words. Here we go. Famously, George Washington hated the British. What people tend to not think about is how George's bad blood with England can compare to Taylor Swift's relationship with the British. Notice we have a transition word, compare, that reminds us that we are looking at similarities that you might not have thought of yet. Taylor dated Joe Alwyn, a British actor, for 6 years. Her co-collaborator on her sister album, Folklore, and Evermore, Joe worked well with Taylor for a long time. She seemed smitten with him in the early years of the relationship, seeing as Reputation and Lover are two of her albums that read and sound almost like open love letters to Joe. George Washington and the British colonies' relationship with England also started positively. The colonies sent raw goods that they got from the New World to England, and England sent back manufactured goods to the colonies. Did you hear the transition word in here that reminds us that we're talking about similarities? It's also. That's one of those words that tells us George Washington did this, Taylor Swift also did it. Here the similarity is things started out okay and then went bad. And so she's giving us specific examples about how there was a trade relationship early on in the British colonies and back in England. And it was a decent relationship. Same thing. Taylor Swift and Joe Alwyn had a decent relationship at first, but things devolved. Let's keep going. The system worked well for both the British and the colonies, as they both got what they wanted out of it. Protection and finished goods for the colonies and raw materials to use in production of the British. However, in a similar fashion to the historical bad blood between the British colonies and England, Taylor's fruitful relationship with Joe eventually ended in disaster. So notice the transition, similar fashion. So we're getting a reminder. This paper is about surprising similarities, comparisons. So let's get an explanation. Where is this disaster ending that they have in common? In April of 23, the press released that Taylor and Joe had split This was shocking and hurtful to the fans, the Swifties, everywhere. A month later, on the CD exclusive version of Taylor's most recent album, Midnights, she released a heartbreaking song titled You're Losing Me that fans speculated was about her breakup with Joe Alwyn. So notice we're getting a very specific example of this messy breakup, just like the breakdown between the relationship with England and the colonies in the early United States. With lyrics describing the tragic, spiraling ending of the relationship, with the opposing party refusing to admit that the relationship isn't working anymore, it's easy to compare this to Washington's relationship with the British. With rising taxes from the British, the settlers in the British colonies were growing discontent with the oppressive relationship they had with their mother country. The British largely ignored the colonists' complaints until the colonists devolved into protests and riots to make their displeasure known. When the British ignored the colonists' attempts to split peacefully from them, Washington led the colonists into a war for the colony's independence. George Washington's hatred of the British and the power they held over the colonies can be compared, there's our transition word, to Swift's breakup with her boyfriend or her ex-boyfriend Joe Alwyn because of the similar events that created the conflict. So, notice the similarity here that both George Washington and Taylor Swift went through these devolving relationships that started out amicably, even symbiotic. There were a lot of benefits for both creativity for Taylor Swift and Joe, and trade for Washington and Britain. But things fell apart, and they ended up in messy, disastrous consequences. And so you can see here in this final body paragraph, we've got specific examples, songs, trade practices. We've got a strong topic sentence, and we have several transition words. Now, the other body paragraphs play out exactly the same, and you can read those on your own. You don't need me to read the entire paper to you. But something I do want to point out here is that the paper has a conclusion on it. And conclusions are a great way to wrap things up. And we can talk about those more in detail later on, but I want you to take note. The introduction of this paper, if you recall, gives us a little bit of backstory about who George Washington was, and it gives us a little bit of backstory about who Taylor Swift is. Now, if you look at this conclusion, it provides somewhat of a summative approach to where this paper has been. Now, one thing about it, if you read it, there's no repetition. The writer gives us a little bit of a reminder what she's arguing. She's covering similarities. But she doesn't give us flat out her thesis statement again. Instead, she reminds us this is a paper about similarities. And so it's kind of just a closing summative thought to wrap things up without flat out repeating her thesis statement. Try to avoid flat out repetition in college level writing. So, that's everything I have to show you in this paper. Remember, it's not perfect, and if you go through it, I'm sure you can find some imperfections. But I'm not claiming it's perfect. I'm saying it earned an A in my class, and there are a lot of ways to earn A's on your papers. You never have to write the perfect paper. So, if you have any questions about anything you've seen in this example essay, shoot me an email in Brightspace, and I'll do my best to help.